And we just see the results. They demanded elections in Palestine. Hamas won. They immediately announced, you don't have to deal with Hamas, even though they were democratically elected. They're a terrorist group. They're off limits. We demanded elections in Lebanon and Hezbollah. They didn't win outright, but they did a lot better and formed a new coalition with the Christians and have increased their power more than ever in the government of Lebanon. Would anybody say that that was in the interests of the West? And just look at us right now. The greatest democracy in the history of the world, and we get to choose between Barack Obama and John McCain. Democracy means nothing if the people living under that democracy do not believe in liberty. That's what democracy is good for, that people who believe in liberty can use their vote and their self-representation in government to preserve that liberty. And when one speaks of the shining city on the hill, that's supposed to be a light of truth, not a laser sight for high explosives falling out of the air on people. I do believe that America is different and is exceptional, and I have noticed also that there is no French dream or Iraqi dream. But what America has for the world is the philosophy of liberty. And the way that you deliver that to people around the world is you email it to them and you fax it to them and, I don't know, send them an iPod with John Locke's Second Treatise on Civil Government on audiobook and spread those throughout the world. But when our government takes our money and takes our blood and uses it to force liberty on people, they just identify what we call liberty with the tyranny that our government brings to them. It, I think, is noteworthy that none of the September 11th hijackers were from the axis of evil countries, Iraq, Iran, or Syria. They were all from Egypt and from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and other Arabian states where there are American combat forces stationed in their land. It wasn't a lack of democracy that made them angry. Certainly our support for their dictatorships was part of their anger. But it wasn't that we hadn't yet to invade Egypt and yet to invade Saudi Arabia and change their regimes and force them to have democracy that motivated them. It was the fact that our government was already in their country. And a lot of the debate since September 11th about terrorism has sort of rested on the premise that history began that day, as though America had not occupied Saudi Arabia ever since 1990, this time in 1990, as though we did not have billions of dollars in military aid to the Israelis in their occupation of Palestine. And we're supposed to just think that the attacks happened just like those planes, out of the clear blue sky. They hate us for no reason but for how good we are, and maybe because we haven't invaded them and given them a democracy yet. And I think as long as our foreign policy operates along that premise, more Americans are going to be killed in spectacular attacks like what happened 7 years ago.
All right, Dr. Kushner, you have a 2-minute rebuttal.
Well, while he was talking, I just emailed some people, when the tsunami hits, go to higher ground. Quite frankly, the United States has an obligation to export our belief system worldwide. You can't be naive to think that because America has a presence that we've caused the problems of 9/11. You know, in domestic law enforcement, we talk about blame the victim. Had not she wore a suggestive dress, she wouldn't have been raped. This is brought down as a moral equivalency about American foreign policy, because it's America's presence in regions of the world are taking natural resources out of a variety of regions in the world that has caused the hatred for the United States. I might remind you that in the year to come, more money will leave this country to purchase foreign oil than has ever left any society in the world. So in that sense, this is not true. The United States has a presence, needs to continue to have a presence. To imply that, you know, in a snide way about John McCain and Obama, there is a significant difference between the two running for elections. And you see this inside this country. Certainly, it wasn't easy going into Iraq. We knew of the difference between Sunni, Shiite, and Kurd. And this is something that continues to exist. But we find now we're making some headway. There seems to be a semblance of some form of democratic government inside of Iraq. And this experiment needs to work, it needs to flourish. And I believe with a little bit of faith and a continued support to our American troops and to the surge, we will have victory inside of Iraq in a matter of time.
Mr. Horton, should the United States reserve the right of preemption in a post-9/11 world? Why or why not?
Yes, but only the same right of preemption that the American government has always maintained. And I would note that that is entirely different than the current American doctrine, which is in fact not a doctrine of preemption, but a doctrine of prevention, preventive war. A preemptive war is if the Spanish Armada is on its way across the Atlantic Ocean, or the British Army is building up on the border of Canada, and someone swings a punch at you and you duck and hit them first, or just you're faster. That would be preemption. A preventive war is, well, even though not a single one of the September 11th hijackers was from Iraq, and even though the government of Iraq didn't have a thing to do with that whatsoever, we can go in there and, sorry, I'm all nervous and lost my train of thought. Pardon me, I was prepared to, I thought I had one more rebuttal and I got lost. What was the question again? Sorry.
The question was,
Sorry.
Should the United States reserve the right
preemption.
of preemption?
Preemption, pardon me. No, preemption, that's called aggressive war when anybody else in the world does it. That's what it's called, it's aggressive war. And no, America should never be in the business of starting wars. And further, this idea that the American Imperial Navy exists in order to deliver storm relief to tsunami victims in the world, rather than that convenient PR exercise while they're on their way to threaten countries off of their shores, is laughable. This is an empire, and the preemptive doctrine, the preemption doctrine, is simply an excuse for spreading the American imperium around. This is the main motivation for the invasion of Iraq, was simply expanding the footprint of the American military to use it as a lily pad, as a base for further wars of aggression. And the idea that Iraq could have ever been a threat to the United States of America, it would have had to have been within the first couple of years after the September 11th attack, when people were still so frightened and the news media was releasing every false plot tortured out of Abu Zubaydah on the nightly news and the orange alerts. Only in those extreme emotional circumstances could anyone have ever believed that Saddam Hussein and Iraq could have ever been a threat to this country. So they say that that was a war of preemption. A war of preemption of what? Saddam Hussein had done everything he could. He gave a 12,000-page dossier to the UN that was, to this date, the most accurate accounting of his former weapons mass destruction programs. We were preempting him. Why? Because his his intelligence agents met with Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker in Prague. Sorry, that just wasn't true. And, there's a reason that they had to lie us into this war. It was because there was no threat to preempt. It's simply an excuse. And then, hopefully we'll get to Iran and the excuse of preempting a nuclear weapons program which does not even exist inside that country.
All right, Dr. Kushner, you have 4 minutes to rebut.
Well, to begin with, I find it quite offensive to say that the American Navy is part of an imperial power that doesn't produce a worldwide good as opposed to worldwide bad, as was indicated. Certainly our military goes on tremendous amount of missions which are humane and continue to be so. But the left always approaches it as if it's building an American empire, an imperial empire which has conquest in its mind. I don't buy that. And there is a connection between Iraq and with 9/11. It's a very sophisticated connection. Certainly the hijackers of 9/11, most of them were Saudis, that's true. But it's not necessarily the nationality that, in this case,